The Metaverse is emerging as the next big technology platform and promises to be the next frontier for human experiences on the internet. Into the Metaverse covers companies, technologies, and trends that are bringing these promises to life. Join creator and host Jonathan Ross-Friedman, founder and CEO of Supersocial, as he interviews the brilliant minds that are building, shaping, and investing in the Metaverse.
Welcome to episode 24 of Into the Metaverse, where we help make sense of the Metaverse through deep interviews with the brilliant minds who build, create for, and invest in the Metaverse. I'm Jon. Joining me today is Piers Ridyard. Aside of being a dear friend and a fellow entrepreneur, Piers is also the CEO of RDX Works. He spent the last 6 years deep in the cryptocurrency space, going from mining on the Genesis block of Ethereum in early 2015 to building and exiting a YC company that built decentralized deal room software for insurance companies in 2017. Piers's background includes finance, law, electronics, and mathematics. We do share that passion for consumer electronics. That's for a different episode. He holds 2 degrees, one in Chinese and business, and a second one in law. RDX Works is a core developer of the decentralized finance protocol called Radix. Radix, as you hear from Piers, is the only smart contract platform that started from the problem of how to decentralize the $400 trillion global economy and work backwards. After 8 years of research and testing and focused development, the Radix network is today valued at over $500 million, and it's growing. Radix offers in-asset-oriented programming language powered by a programmable DeFi engine. Piers, so good to have you on the show here with me today.
When you say it all like that, it sounds super impressive. Thank you so much for having me.
It is impressive, and we're going to talk about all of that. A quick disclaimer, as always, everything discussed on the podcast is not a financial advice. Content is strictly educational. Piers, let's dig in. As we continue to build an evolving consensus around what the Metaverse is, the first question that I like to each guest that comes on the show is, what is the Metaverse for you and what it is not?
Yeah, so I think of the Metaverse as the digital space in which you own digital representation of assets, and then where those assets can be created as visual representations for different platforms. And I know that's a really abstract way of talking about it. Let me break that down. So digital ownership is a concept that was only brought in with Web3, right? And Web3 is blockchain-based technology stack where you can create digital objects that can be sovereignly owned by an individual or by a smart contract. And you can think of this like Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin is a form of a digital asset. So's token for the Radix network. But on top of these ledgers, you can also create representations of other things. So you can create representations of NFTs, which is a big part of what people think of as the Metaverse. NFT just means non-fungible token, but the first application that has really been used for has been art, where people will be familiar with Bored Apes or with CryptoPunks or with CryptoKitties. And all of these digital representations can be owned by you as an individual, separate to the thing that are generated by. And the reason this is important is when you start thinking about things like games, right? So if I'm on Call of Duty or if I'm on Fortnite, there's a big market in skins, because you can get skins for your gun to make your gun look pretty or whatever when you play a game. You get all of your kills and all of your rank and all of that kind of stuff, but that all exists within the servers of the company that created it. There's no separation from the things that are owned by the players and the entire IP of the game itself. Whereas if I have representations of those on top of a public ledger, so if I created a new game, where now the game assets, the in-game assets that I own, I actually own them, not just as a character, but I'm able to have them represented in my wallet, and I can send them to other people, and I can demonstrate that I own them outside of just the game world. I can open up my wallet that's got nothing to do with the game and say, hey, look, I've got this guns associated with this game. And for me, the Metaverse is the starting point. We're very, very early. We're only starting to scratch the surface of what this will really mean. But it's where, when you walk through a digital world, much like when you walk through a real world, there's a concept of what you own and what everyone else owns, right? And so you've got your phones in your pocket, you've got your skateboard, you've got your shoes, you've got your clothes. Those are yours, and it doesn't matter if you go into Applebee's or Apple or into Google or Facebook or like just walk into a coffee shop. You don't have to ask permission to walk in with your clothes. They're your clothes, they're your objects. And the metaverse is the first place in which Web3 ownership can translate into being able to walk around digital space with those owned objects that actually belong to you. They're not IP or ownership of the games that you're going through or the experiences you're going through. They're things that are sovereign to you. And this creates this concept of a digital world that starts to feel more like the real world we know. It starts to feel more like, oh, this is my stuff, and these are the experiences I'm experiencing. But as I say, very early days.
So after this really fantastic deep dive, I think my immediate question is, and I have been asked about that personally as well, and so I'm really curious about your point of view, for the metaverse to truly materialize as envisioned by so many people, as you said, that virtual realm that really mimics real life, where we own our assets, we can carry them with us, either assets and of course our identity. A key question I have is, in order for that to be enabled or materialize, is it mandatory that it's built based on decentralized technologies like blockchain, or powered by that?
So the asset ownership does need to be, but the games themselves don't. And this is where it's sort of like, you can think of it as like real world analogies work here too, right? If I walk into a Nike store, all of Nike's shoes belong to Nike until the point that I purchase one, and then it's mine and I walk out. And it's absolutely feasible that you can create a game, and that game is entirely run on servers, run by a company for profit. But if I earn something or if I buy something, that then becomes a representation issued on top of a public ledger that I keep with me. And if I turn up to the game tomorrow and I connect to my wallet, the game goes, oh, I see you have these objects that you own from my game, and let me just render you in the way that those objects would suggest. But separating out the concept of playing a thing versus owning things, I think it is a key part of this. So no, I don't think that games themselves have to be decentralized. I think they can be, but I actually think that might be like a little bit of a red herring, because building a decentralized game, fully decentralized game, is quite difficult, right?
On-chain. You're talking about on-chain games.
Yeah, a fully on-chain game where you're running the execution of the game itself via some kind of decentralized marketplace for compute and graphic processing and all that kind of stuff. So you can go too far, but then there's also the other side of this, which is like, some games are beloved, and sometimes companies decide to shut them down because they're not profitable anymore. And so if you do decentralized games, you have this ability to maintain a digital universe that stays alive forever and continues to evolve based on the passion of the community. You've seen that in some games that are now open source. People put Doom on everything as like a silly example, right? I think that the key for me is that the ownership representations are decentralized when it comes to the point of ownership by an individual. Everything else you can have a debate on. Everything else is a variable feast, I think.
And I think that's a super helpful distinction, right? Because there are people who are more on the maximalist side of like, everything needs to be decentralized, everything needs to run on blockchain, and so on and so forth. And then on the other side, you have proponents of the existing web. There's nothing wrong with Web 2.0. There's nothing wrong with walled garden. I don't know how many are out there who are actually proponents of that, but there are people who don't see any issue with the way the internet looks today. And I think in between both of these kind of maximalist or this clash of internet civilizations, there is probably a lot of truth in the middle, which I think one of them is what you've just described, where there is not necessarily a critical role for decentralized technologies to play in everything that we're building for this next era of the internet. But what you're saying, which I think is important, is that for the elements of owning your assets, owning your identity, and being able to carry that ownership of whatever assets it is with you across the web, that is at the core of the promise of a quote unquote decentralized internet.
Yes, absolutely. I think there's an inherent there's a trade-off between decentralization and centralization. I don't think people talk about that much because decentralization is so new. But it comes down to speed of execution, right, versus resiliency. So infrastructure, for global infrastructure, for things that we as a human race rely on fundamentally, you want high resiliency, right? It may not change quickly, but you want high resiliency. If you think of anything about the internet used to run on IPv4, and they decided to upgrade to IPv6. But guess what? A good portion of the internet still runs on IPv4. And you've had to support this changeover for like 10 years and it's still going. So it changes very slowly. But because the entire world relies on the ability of generating IP addresses and communicating packets between those IP addresses to make the internet work in the first place, resiliency is the key, not how quickly something can be changed, but how well it survives any kind of like critical failure. And that was the internet was built around the concept of nuclear warfare, right? And that's what public ledger is built about as well. It's built around resiliency and decentralization. That concept is also based around the concept of resiliency. However, if you're building experiences tend to be trend-based. They tend to be things that move quickly. People move on, they decide they like something else, they want a new thing because they get bored of one experience, they move on to another. That's the nature of the entertainment business. The entertainment business is change incarnate, it's inherently change. And so decentralizing something that you want to be at base a creative process is actually quite difficult. There's lots of companies that have tried and failed through the years in the Web 1 world, in the Web 2 world, in the manufacturing world to try and outsource the concept of innovation. But weirdly, it seems that innovation tends to need to require a relatively small group of highly talented, highly motivated, well-funded people that have the ability to make decisions on their own and just do whatever the fuck they want to do, right? And so if you start going down the road of decentralization, you have to be clear on that matrix of resiliency versus speed, where you sit and what matters more. And so like I can see there being games that are created as highly centralized entities to start off with, that once they reach a certain critical mass where essentially the functionality that exists isn't really being updated anymore, but the community that wants that thing to continue to exist is very large, that's the point where you may want to think about resiliency versus speed of execution. But I think that a lot of people think about this too early because there is a lot of, I think, magical thinking that happens in the decentralization space, where the idea that community is going to be able to out-execute in terms of sort of speed of innovation, especially in the creative space, hasn't really proven to be true. But I think a lot of people like to think about that. What has actually happened within the decentralization space a lot has been everyone wants to have a voice, but no one wants to take responsibility. And again, that can create communities that don't really move anywhere. They spend a lot of time arguing or discussing things, but nothing actually gets created out of the back of it. So I think that metaverse companies, good metaverse companies, are probably going to all start as centralized entities that are really focusing on something great, bringing a fantastic product to market. And then once it's got enough traction and belief and community behind it, maybe start to look towards decentralization from the point of view of the game.
I love that. Great input. And I think it's a great springboard to dig deeper on the core work from RDX Works. Would love if you can share with folks the kind of the core mission of the company and the organization, your vision for what the world that you guys are trying to help create, and a bit of the promise of the products you have at play today. And also if you can connect that in a way to how can that help shape, form the emergence of the metaverse?
Absolutely. I'd say RDX Works, what we're building, so very much tends towards the resiliency side of things, right? Our starting point was we think that the advent of blockchain technology is as transformational to the world as the advent of the internet was. And the thing that is most likely to be affected, by this is going to be sort of money, finance, financial objects and ownership, right? And so we started, unlike most blockchain companies that have basically gone, okay, here's Bitcoin, let's add a little thing to it. We started from the other way. We said, well, what's this going to look like? It's going to be $400 trillion of assets sitting on top of a public ledger that you're going to want to be so resilient that it is considered to be safer than any government or any individual company, that people could legitimately trust their entire life's wealth and that of generations to come on top of. And it has to be able to work for every single person in the world. That's a pretty big ask. So let's start breaking down and thinking about what a roadmap to that kind of infrastructure looks like. And it really doesn't look like what we have today, right? today, decentralized finance is run on things like Ethereum, on Solana, on Avalanche. And in just this year, there's been $2 billion worth of hacks. And the DeFi industry itself has something like $100 billion under management. The highest was $220 billion under management, but only got 18,500 full-time Web3 developers, right? Which makes one Web3 developer basically worth about $5 million in total value locked, which is crazy. And so we're looking at this and going, well, the global financial industry is doing 2 to 20 million transactions per second, 2 to 10 million transactions per second. Ethereum is struggling at 20 to 30 transactions per second. Solana can do 65,000 transactions per second. We're getting all of these hacks and no one's developing in the space. There needs to be a wholesale rethink in all of the things that are necessary to actually make it possible to decentralize the global financial industry. So what Radix has done is 3 core innovations. The first is around the concept of scalability. A big part of Radix's history was just scalability research. And we built an algorithm called Cerberus, which allows you to do the same thing that GPUs did for processing. Right? So you can think of a blockchain a bit like a CPU. So every single block has to be processed in order. And the same thing on a single thread on a CPU. Everything has to be processed in order. You have to wait for the thing that you want to go through. What we realized is that you can actually create parallel processing on top of these public ledgers. And we created a consensus algorithm that allows parallel processing, which allows you to go from tens and hundreds of transactions per second to thousands, millions, and multiple millions of transactions per second. And that's what Cerberus, our key consensus algorithm, is built around, which is necessary just as table stakes to be able to decentralize the global financial system. The next thing we did is we were like, okay, why are there only 18,500 Web3 developers? It's not like developers haven't heard about Web3. It's one of the most invested in areas in the last 7 years, blockchain and crypto. And so we went and spoke. We interviewed about 1,000 DeFi developers and projects. And we just said, hey, guys, what do you spend your time doing? And time of work, spend about 80% of their time on security and about 20% of their time on functionality. And the time it takes to get up to speed to be able to be a Web3 developer is between 12 months and 1.5 years of work to be able to be confident enough to be able to build smart contracts. So we're like, okay, we need a new development paradigm. We need a new programming language. The EVM and Solidity isn't it. So what we did is we created something called Scripto. And Scripto is a asset-oriented programming language. It's one of the first asset-oriented programming languages that has existed because it takes this idea of the purpose of these public ledgers as assets. So let's make a programming language that thinks about assets as a native function of the programming language. And we launched that in December in a sandbox environment. And in less than 8 months, we ended up at 2,600 developers in our community. And the feedback we're getting is incredible. People are going, this is the best programming language I've ever used. And the purpose and the reason that we realized this was necessary is that the internet needed the same thing. Like for Internet 2.0 to actually take off, you needed a programming language for the web, and that was JavaScript. And we're doing the same thing here, only we've taken a longer time to do. Instead of building it in a week like JavaScript was, we're testing it for 1.5 years because, again, resiliency matters, security matters. So not only do we have this infrastructure that's incredibly scalable for building decentralized financial systems, we also have this programming language that actually lowers the barrier to entry to allow us to take us from 18,500 Web3 developers today to the millions of developers that are going to be necessary to create the Web3 world of tomorrow. And then the last part of this is security. If you can't trust that the programs that you put your money into aren't going to be exploited, the global financial system is not going to be moving into these platforms. So again, instead of taking the EVM route, the Ethereum virtual machine, we created our own execution environment called the Radix Engine, which basically gives you a huge amount more guarantees around the execution of these things. So instead of doing this sort of weird hack of JavaScript, which is essentially what Solidity and the EVM is, we've created this special execution environment. You can think of it as a little bit like a game engine, but a game engine for finance that gives you all the primitives and all of the security that you would expect around building these platforms so that you don't end up with the kind of bugs and hacks and exploits that occur in network today. And it's those 3 things: fundamentally scalable infrastructure, fundamentally secure development execution environments, and fundamentally better developer experience that we think is necessary, and what Radix is delivering that makes it necessary to be able to decentralize $400 trillion global financial system.
I'm sure everyone is, okay, that was, I've heard this before, but it was so great to hear you articulate it in a few minutes now. And so what I want to unpack here is totally understand the pain points of what prevents, and we talked about before actually starting the recording about how incredible the developer ecosystem on a platform like Roblox. And I believe that building and nurturing and sustaining a incredible developer community for any platform, let alone in a new frontier where you are really creating new programming language like crypto, and you need to educate and inform and support a whole new developer ecosystem, massive challenges. What do you think are, with that respect, some of the key challenges that Radix is facing in a growing adoption of your environment and your tools and your products, and how are you addressing that today?
Right. So Roblox is a great, right? Roblox does something that most people don't realize is a superpower. It's fundamentally a superpower. The reason that people start developing on Roblox is because they played with Roblox first, right? They got playing with it, they became gamers, they then got passionate about it, and they're like, man, I want to build a game. And I believe I can. And what a lot of the crypto industry is doing at the moment is that it thinks everyone's coin operated. They're like, oh, we'll just throw money at developers and we'll start building on our platform. But the thing is most people start from the basis of going, I need a personal passion and an education path. And if I don't have an education path, I'm not going to make the decision to quit my job or start building on this thing, because it doesn't matter how often Solana Avalanche says, come build on Solana Avalanche and you might make the next $100 million application. No developer, no individual is going to believe that until they've seen a path pathway for education to the point where they can actually understand what they need to do. And so what we've realized is that with Scripto, and this incredible tool just to learn Web3, that our pathway is converting people's passion in crypto and passion in DeFi and giving them a tool that allows them to easily play around with it. It's not about going start a business here. It's absolutely about going learn what Web3 is. You're a developer, you think in code. Here's a set of tools that allows you to understand what Uniswap is, what a decentralized exchange is, what a lending platform is, in a way that feels intuitive, in a way that feels easy. And that education path, where you start with a passion, give them a pathway to education, ends with people building companies. Like some of those people go, oh my God, this is so easy. Or I've seen an opportunity. Now I've got that pathway down and I'm starting to spend time in the community. I see an opportunity in the same way that Roblox guys do. Like they play the games and then they go, oh, this game doesn't do this thing. I really wish it'd do this thing. I'll build that thing and maybe I'll make my own game next time. And that's what's happening within our community. And that's what we focus on, is that importance, because ultimately every single DeFi developer, almost without fail, every single DeFi developer that is going to be a DeFi developer, is going to be a Web3 developer in the future, has not entered the industry yet. We're that early in the industry. There's that few people that we have to educate 500,000, a million, 2 million, 5 million developers. The pathway is all about education and harnessing passion. And I think that the best way of doing that is by creating a tool that's intuitive and fun to use. And that's really what we focused on doing with Scripto.
And is that part of the reason why you guys have established this sort of organization called GoodFi? Is part of that to inform and educate people all around the world about more broadly? Because I know it's not an initiative where you guys are the only company. I know there's a bunch of different organizations that are part of that. But was that core to the reason of starting it?
No, that was actually looking at the user side. So we realized that the DeFi wouldn't. So GoodFi is an organization dedicated to get the next 100 million people to put their first dollar into DeFi. Because we realized that the most difficult thing is the first dollar. It's not about how much of your wealth you're putting into those platforms. It's getting you to the point where you have all of the tools you need to get the first dollar. In the same way that, like, in the early days of the internet, the battle was just getting people connected, getting someone to buy a computer. They didn't have a computer, to give up their phone line, because you have to give up your phone line when you're using the internet, to have some engineer coming around and doing like some physical work to actually get it working, and then learning to use this thing called a browser for the first time. That was your threshold. That was getting people over. That was really, really hard.
And that took like an hour.
And that took a lot longer than an hour, right? It was a difficult learning journey for most people. With DeFi, we realized that for users to come into the space and to expand out from the few 100,000 / low millions that DeFi, that crypto has as a user base, and expand that out into a much larger user base, we had to give people the tools to be able to use decentralized finance. And so we created this consortium around education of end users about what it means to DeFi means. What was really interesting, though, is from a lot of our user journeys through talking to those people that we first touched with that consortium, was that the user journey for DeFi is basically awful, like really, really awful. So I think Web3 and DeFi needs to have what I call its Netscape Navigator moment. Like MetaMask is awful. It's not a consumer product. And basically every single wallet is also pretty bad. So I think that the thing that we really learned from GoodFi is that the industry's got probably another 2 to 5 years of development to go before we can really start to reach out to people who've never touched crypto before and get them into DeFi. If you're in DeFi today, you're kind of an insider. You're kind of like, you spent 3 to 6 months reading white papers and playing around with stuff, and you're okay with pressing confirm and the thing not like appearing for 20 minutes and not being like, oh my God, is all of my money gone? So yeah.
And by the way, I think that articulation of the user side, which I think was important to highlight as well, in a way, that's exactly part of that cycle you've mentioned that Roblox did pretty well. And it took Roblox. I mean, everyone looks at Roblox today and like, oh my God, this new company. And no, it's like 16 years. They have been nurturing this generation of users, of players who became developers, who then became creators and business builders. And I think that's what's happening at the moment in DeFi, and maybe even more broadly in Web3, where a lot of the creators are also the users, which is why the overall size of the number of people in the ecosystem is relatively small out of the global population, or at least the people who have access to the internet. And so I think it wouldn't be that crazy to say, yeah, it will take another 3, 5, maybe even 7 years for that developer base who started as users to create more applications and make it more simple and more compelling and more appealing for the pure user audience that don't want to know anything. And yes, as you said, like the first time I waited 20 minutes until one kind of went from one place to another, I was like, yeah, it's gone, but it's gone. It's never coming back. And then it appears after 20, 25 minutes. If you look at the way human behavior sort of responds to fluctuation in the stock market, you kind of understand that this is not going to be easy for people to adopt as a tool of everyday finance, savings, investments, if they don't have 100% confidence in the performance of the system and trust. And as you said, resilience, I think that's another great term. And Piers, this is a great segue to another point I wanted to talk about, which is obviously there's been a lot of backlash, as you might have seen, around the very nature of the financialization of the internet with crypto and blockchain, as well as why do we need to rebuild the internet? Why do we need to rebuild the internet now? And why do we need to rebuild the internet with blockchain? And so I'd love if you can take a few minutes and educate our listeners. Why do you, as a builder in the space for a very long time already, why do you think that blockchain, crypto, Web3 broadly, that sort of as a category of technologies, why these technologies matter for the evolution of the internet into the next kind of stage?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because when people say, we need to rebuild the internet, a lot of people mean very different things by that. First of all, we're not rebuilding the internet as the protocol. TCP/IP and UDP and all of the other protocols that run the internet, they're not going away. That's fundamentally a piece of human infrastructure that we need. What people generally talk about is they're talking about rebuilding the concept of digital ownership on the internet. But actually, it's wider than that. It's rethinking the concept of ownership. So when one thinks about what ownership means, it generally means that I've got to a company, and a company has said, yes, you own this thing, and they keep a balance of what you own. So, if I go to Barclays and open an account, my account is in Barclays. I have to go to Barclays and say, how much money do I have? And Barclays will say that you got this money. And they go, well, can I please transfer the money? And then Barclays then does that on my behalf. You can also think about this from the point of view of property ownership. If I own my house, the house is on a land registry, and I go to the government and I say, do I own this land? And they say yes. And then I go, well, can I transfer this land to Jan? And they say yes. And so this concept of ownership is actually a massive archipelagos of badly connected islands, right? The house ownership net system is in no way connected to the banking system, that in which the bank, where I can delegate authority to the banking system to update something on my property ownership register, unless I've signed a bunch of paperwork. It's all very manual. Anyone who's done mortgages will understand quite how manual all of these things are. And then anyone who's done financial transactions, everything's also incredibly manual. If you look at the way that Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan trade off each other, a lot of the trades are settled basically by sending Excel spreadsheets to each other, CSVs. It's because their systems don't actually talk to each other, don't understand any of their internal databases. You think about the stock market, right? A share only trades, generally speaking, on one stock market. It doesn't trade on multiple stock markets. The share, so you can think of a stock exchange essentially having a monopoly on the listing of a stock. And that doesn't speak to any other stock market. So if I've got some Apple shares on one stock market and I've got some Baidu shares on another stock market, I can't just swap them for each other. I have to go into money, go across the money network, go out of money, go into the broking network, get the next stock and then buy that. And then all of the complexity that comes across with that. What the internet changed was this idea that you can have a single location, a single network, a single platform on which all information could be viewed simultaneously. Public ledger, blockchain network, public ledger like Radix, is the same concept, but for ownership, for things that are representation of money, representations of assets, representations of things that any company at the moment currently says that you own, but you have to go to 1 million companies to actually work out what you own. You got your loyalty points, your air miles, your house, your stocks, your bank statements, all of the things that you own collectively are actually in a bewildering plethora. Think about pensions and how many different pension programs you might have as a result of working for different companies. But we accept that as the norm because there is no concept of going, no, these are my objects. I own them legally. These are actually mine. They belong to me. And instead, we take as part of our day-to-day lives, going to all of these different places and going through all of the hassle and rigmarole and admin of that. But also the other thing that it doesn't give you is the ability to create incredible things that seem obvious, right? Think about credit cards, right? Think about credit cards from the point of view. A credit card is a unsecured loan. So you get charged 20% per annum, right? For a credit card. It's probably going to go up now the interest rates are going up. If you're in your 30s, you probably have some assets. You probably got some stocks, you probably got some crypto, you probably got some property. And so what does an unsecured loan mean? Well, it actually means that if you defaulted on your credit card, they'd come after those assets. But those assets you can borrow against. I can borrow against my house at 2% per annum at the moment. It's probably also going to go up, right? So why does my financial universe not come together? Why do I end up paying huge amounts of interest on things when actually I should just be able to put up the collateral that I'm actually already putting up based on how my finance works, but it's not all connected up. And then you go into things like you'd spend 10,000 hours on World of Warcraft and you have a bunch of orcs and suddenly you forget your login or you lose your email address and then you don't own those assets anymore because World of Warcraft won't let you in and they can't validate you as a person. So all of this horrible ways in which the financial system, our ownership system is badly connected, that is consolidated into something that can create the basis for entirely new types of products and services that are built on top of these platforms that we don't understand yet. This is the hard thing. This is often the problem with futurism, is that as a futurist, you kind of just go,
we think this technology is revolutionary because it creates all of these new tools that then people can build on top of it. But at the start of the internet, we didn't know Facebook was going to exist. We didn't know Google was going to exist. We didn't know Twitter was going to exist. We just knew that the technology was revolutionary and was going to create an entirely new way of sharing and consuming information. And now we're at the start of a revolutionary technology that we think is going to create an entirely new way of owning and transferring assets, right? That will lead to the Facebooks, the Googles, the Twitters of the next generation of financial products that will also, I think, have a lot of overlap with where we spend our digital lives. Like the concept of spending a digital life, like hours and hours of your time in games and then actually not getting anything for it, just paying for the privilege. I think that's going to move as well. So you'll start to see some like early examples of this in play to earn. But I think these are all like toys for now. But where the metaverse is going to go, like the idea of buying and owning like a Gucci t-shirt and then being able to wear it in the metaverse as a result of owning the NFT from that transaction, because you actually had to go and buy it at the store and I have a digital representation of it, or just buying it digitally. That stuff that to our generation feels weird, that already doesn't feel weird to the next generation, doesn't feel weird to like your Generation Zs. So I think there's this paradigm shift that's occurring. And so what most people do is doing the same things they did at the start of the internet, right? They went, why do I need the internet? Because if I need to contact anyone in the world, I just pick up a telephone. And if I need to send some documents to anyone in the world, I just put it in a fax. Why do I need anything other than a fax and a telephone? And that's the same thing, that's the same arguments that I see right now.
I mean, there's so much to unpack, and we are almost at time. I want to ask two last questions. The first one is, what do we need? What needs to be true, or what needs to be in place to enable what you've described at scale and sustainably?
Yeah, so you have to. I mean, what Radix is building, really, like you have to start with the right technology stack for the job. Because everything flows from that. Everything flows from the platform on which people can build. And people don't realize that at the start of the internet, there was essentially a protocol war. There was a protocol Gopher. France tried to create its own network, French-owned internet called Telnet. There was a lot of discussion about what the emergent standard would be and a lot of competition. And this time, because it's to do with finance, because it's to do with a much bigger industry, there's a lot more competition. But ultimately, the right infrastructure with the right technology stack on top of it is what enables everything else. What means that these platforms can end up doing the things that we think they can. And that's the phase of the industry we're in, still working it out, right? Radix is a contender to being the platform on which all of decentralized finance is built. But so are other platforms that are trying to do the same thing as well. And the thing that's going to decide it isn't going to actually be the platform creators, it's going to be the ecosystems that emerge on top of these platforms. And is why we spend so much of our time focusing on that, because ultimately we are a platform for other people's success. And so all we can do is create incredible things, tools that help creators and entrepreneurs actually make the businesses that will shape tomorrow. And that's why I think it's such an exciting space to be in, because every single person who's listening to this podcast is early. Every single person could be a creator of tomorrow, have plenty of time to get up the speed, up the curve, spend 3-6 months learning how to use these tools, and be one of the first people to be building in this new space.
I was about to say, as we conclude this terrific conversation, what's the one thing you'd like the listeners to take away from it? But I think you've said it already, which was basically we are a platform for other people's success and that we're super early. And for all of our listeners, yes, you are in that really unique group of being super early to the space. And so, Piers, thanks so much for being with us today. I learned a lot. I think it was super educating, and I'm sure we're going to talk more in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Into the Metaverse. We hope you learned a lot and explored new aspects of the Metaverse.